I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods, yeah. One in particular, I'm just a messenger, let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things, promise you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop, give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box, and you cannot compare them at all, so don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire, I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, yeah. Fantasy round table, come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, woo. Fantasy round table, come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
What is going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast. We are proud to be a part of the Pigskin Podcast Network, which you can find at PigskinPodNet on Twitter, or you can search the hashtag TPPN. If you guys are watching live, you will notice that is not Matt Fox below us. That is ESPN analyst Eric Moody. He has also contributed to Pro Football Network, The Athletic. He covers the NFL, NBA, and the WNBA. For ESPN, he's a former Fortune 500 manager and is now chasing his dreams, analyzing fantasy football, basketball, everything for ESPN. Eric, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. How are you doing tonight?
No, things are going pretty good. I'm fully caffeinated, ready to rock and roll. Appreciate the invite, gentlemen. And anytime someone reached out to talk about fantasy football, I'm always on board for that.
So how does the guy go from being a bigwig in a Fortune 500 company, make his way over to, now granted, I think Disney's a Fortune 500 company as well.
Yeah, Fortune 100.
Yeah, but the role seems to be substantially different. What was that path like, and what made you go, you know what, I'm going for it?
It's funny, you make it sound like I was such a bigwig, but no, I was a manager, like middle management. And the financial services company. I'll kind of give you the Reader's Digest version. So I've always had sales type roles. I sold Cutco in college, did a short stint in beer, wine, and spirits sales, and then went right into financial services, which I've been for the bulk of my career. So I've made cold calls to people, trying to position mutual fund stocks. I've worked in call centers. I've worked in face-to-face firms. I've worked in banks, and so I was at the point for where the company I was with at the time going through a lot of changes. I know the whole mantra of the companies, change is constant, and it was so many changes that took place. I was thinking, you know what, if I'm going to go for the sports thing, I think now is the time. And so I went ahead and made the transition into sports full time, and was fortunate enough that ESPN had an opportunity that popped up, that I was able to take advantage of. So all the stars aligned, and here we are.
Well, I had a long career in beer, wine, and spirits consumption, so.
I love it. It's a funny business, and I wasn't in the side of it for where it was like like bars and restaurants. Like I was off premise, as they would call it. So places where you would buy, the spirits, beer, wine to consume it. That's where I would, that was most of my accounts. So like grocery stores, spirit shops, etc. So
yeah, well, I'm here in Columbus, Ohio. We've got a great big Anheuser-Busch brewery.
Oh yeah.
A whole bunch of microbreweries now, and we even had some what's the name? A company, a distillery popped up doing bourbon, gin, and vodka. A Watershed distillery that's kind of growing a little bit. So we've had lots of that stuff pop up here in Columbus. So as looking at this off season, it's been like the front offices have been taken over by fantasy managers, and we get it again today with another big trade between the Saints and the Eagles. What's your take on that trade?
Well, I'll be candid. First of all, I was kind of scratching my head as like like what? Like what are we doing here? And so my initial take was that I think the move, I was looking at it mainly from like the Eagles perspective, because they've got a ton of fantasy, really fantasy relevant players that a lot of people are concerned about. So what I was thinking is that it essentially gives like one more year, for the Eagles to evaluate Jalen Hurts before deciding whether to commit to him longer term. He's up for an extension after the 2022 season. So it gives them an opportunity to evaluate him to say, hey, is he going to be our quarterback of the future? For the franchise, or are we going to go in a different direction? So that was really my main takeaway, from that trade, looking at all the picks and different things that were involved.
Do you think that given the continual salary cap issues that the Saints have, that it really makes sense for them to kind of try to trade up? I know they've got to rebuild. They've struggled since Drew Brees left and now Sean Payton, but it feels to me like they should go the Atlanta Falcons route and just like cash everything in and suck for a year or two and get back to zero where they're not trying to restructure 50 people each season.
Yeah, and they've got to obviously make some moves, like to your point, given the cap situation. And I was just thinking with the Saints, I know three positions I know that they really need to address, whether it's through a free agent or the draft, would be wide receiver, offensive tackle, and also safety. So I'm a Saints fan. I've been a diehard Saints fan, since I was a little kid. But I'll be curious to see what additional moves they make moving forward, because the cap situation, it does keep me up at night.
Yeah. Well, I have so being a diehard Saints fan, so Matt and I are both long suffering Ohio State fans. So is Michael Thomas, is he coming back this year? Is he gonna step back in? It feels like he kind of went off the rails, not necessarily physically. It felt like he kind of was starting to veer towards the Colin Kaepernick sort of, not protest, but social activism a little bit, reading some of his tweets and stuff.
Yeah, it's a really, I'd say, intriguing like situation, because all the banner back and forth between Michael Thomas, Sean Payton, Saints organization as a whole, and then like we'll say the miscommunication as it relates to the rehab, with his ankle. So it was a nightmare. So I do see him coming back. I think he may miss a handful of games, but I think he's still a guy that will end up leading that team, in targets. I could see him easily getting between 105 to 115 targets. I just don't think he's going to be as fantasy relevant as he was like in the past. So I'm looking at him more so as a high end wide receiver 3, low end wide receiver 2. Unless something dramatically changes. So we'll see.
Do you think there's any chance your Saints go for a quarterback with one of these two picks now?
I'd be surprised, just given, with them bringing back Jameis Winston. They also added, Andy Dalton, and so I'd be really, really surprised if they went quarterback there.
So, yeah, because Jameis, he's signed for what, 28 million. 28 million. Sorry, you can't see air quotes on the podcast. So theoretically, that's better than backup money. That's not backup money, I don't think. It's low end starter money.
Yeah.
So it feels like they've made at least a 2-year commitment to him, and I feel like he deserved it, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
I coming out of Tampa, yeah, he threw 30 interceptions, but he also threw 33 touchdowns, and some of that was his willingness to, I think, make throws other quarterbacks won't try to make. So I'm excited to see him get an opportunity. It's kind of a bummer that the Saints are sort of in the cap strap situation, but it is refreshing that they finally declared Taysom Hill a tight end.
Yeah, so that experiment, I think, is officially over.
What are your thoughts on that? Matt, who is not here with us, is a massive Taysom Hill fan. He was kind of hoping that would work out. Do you think he's got any real future at tight end?
I think he does. Once that news was announced, I was sitting there thinking, I was like how many targets, could this guy, end up getting? And then I was thinking, on the other hand, you've got Adam Troutman that's there, and so I'd be really surprised. I'll be candid that Taysom Hill's like actively involved, like as a tight end. Like, I think you're looking at a situation where Troutman's going to lead that team, at least in tight end targets, and then followed by Taysom Hill. But I think it's going to be a substantial gap between like Adam Troutman and Taysom Hill. So that's just my opinion. I just don't think he's going to be fantasy relevant, no matter how relevant we want to make him.
Yeah, he just doesn't seem like he doesn't have the size to play, a high percentage of snaps at tight end and be effective, in my opinion.
Yeah, and the fluctuating weight, hey, I'm going to lose weight to play quarterback, and I'm going to put weight back on. He hasn't had like a consistent amount of time, like at one position, especially in the NFL, where the competition is fierce. It's like he's only kind of hurting himself with all this, fluctuations back and forth. But it is what it is.
So last question I want to ask you on that trade really quick before we move
Mhm.
on to your QB tiers. With
Mhm.
the Saints moving up here, do you think they did it for a wide receiver? I know you mentioned just a minute ago that's kind of a need for them. Do you think there's a wide receiver they'd like to target, or is there a wide receiver you would like to see them target on draft day?
Yeah, no, I would like to see them, target a wide receiver. As far as like who, not really sure for right now. I know that's one other element of this trade I was still kind of looking into, with them adding these additional picks on who they would target. I know that's something on my to-do list. So I don't really have a name, but I'll kind of let me think about it for a moment. Do you have any names that come to mind that you're thinking that would be a good target for them?
I was trying to think of who would fall to 16. I feel like Garrett Wilson and Drake London will probably be gone. I don't know if Jamison Williams fits there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know if they take like a Chris Olave, a guy who could be a deep threat, since I know Michael Thomas gets the quote unquote moniker of being a slant boy. I think he's just as fine as a deep threat as well. But I think Olave would be a good two to Michael Thomas if he could get there. But yeah, I was just curious if there was there was one. I feel like Wilson for sure would be gone. I don't know who else might go before that pick.
I've got a couple of names. Just thinking about some of like the top, the top targets. I was thinking, like Bama's, Jameson Williams. That could be a fit. Like Drake London. Of course, Traylon Burks. Everyone loves him. Chris Olive. You mentioned some names. I'm like, if they're going to take the plunge like early, I think those will be some names that would be a really good fit. With the Saints. It just depends on how the cookie crumbles, and we always have a lot of surprises in the draft each year where guys are being drafted where we're really surprised that they're being drafted.
So what you mentioned Traylon Burks. I saw the other day, you said if people loved Andre Johnson, that they were going to love Traylon Burks too.
Yeah.
After Burks's athletic measurables come in, he didn't measure up to Johnson very well in that regard. Do you still stick by that? Do you think he's got that? Is that like his top end, or that it could happen, or something you think is maybe even likely?
Yeah, no, I think it could happen just from watching him on film. And, I'm a big like Andre Johnson fan. I got a photo behind me, Andre Johnson. So huge fan of his game. So I just see, some similarities there. And it's kind of one of those things for where you have some folks where they're going to look at, like the measurables and all these advanced metrics and try to make that determination. Hey, this person has similar metrics. That's the guy. But I always like to play the piano like with both hands. Metrics play a part, likewise the film. And that was just a comparison early on that I had, of Andre Johnson and him. And so I do stick by it.
Well, I mean, and then he was clocked in game at 22.09 mile per hour or something like that. Burks was.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly there's speed there. I don't know if that was maybe build up speed, because his explosion numbers weren't terrific, but
yeah, it was tracked over his, I think it was the 70-yard run against Bama where he took that screen pass and kind of ran by everybody. It was taken on that play, like while he was moving down the field. So he's a big boy, man. It takes a little bit of time to build up, I think. He's it takes a lot of time to get that train moving. Dennis, you want to get this kicked off with the QB tiers here?
Yeah. So I saw you throw out your QB tiers, I think last Thursday, and by and large, I appreciate them or agree with them. What struck me is, Kyler Murray, who you have in tier 2, a lot of people are really, really big on him. I'm not as high, but what sort of separated him out of tier 1 as a young mobile quarterback that pushed him down to tier 2 for you? What separates him from tier 1?
Yeah, when I was thinking about Murray and just kind of looking, at his career, NFL career up to this point, I just really see a lot of inconsistencies, on a per game basis. I know it's easy to get enamored by his dual threat ability, with his rushing yards and everything there, but I just love to see a little bit more consistency with him as a passer. And so that was one factor that led into having him in tier 2 and not in tier 1 with some of those other upper echelon quarterbacks. And it's kind of hard to, if you're going to compare like Murray with guys like Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, and Joe Burrow, when you look at their statistical body of work. So those are all things that played a part in putting Murray in that second tier.
My struggle with Murray has always been that his secret sauce is the run.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel like he has the durability. And we saw it last year. Once he got that foot nicked up, then that really limited him. And when he loses that mobility, his passing becomes less effective. Now, it didn't help that he lost DeAndre Hopkins for a long stretch last season either. And now with Christian Kirk moving on, there's going to be some questions. Zach Ertz is back and James Conner is back, and those are nice pieces.
Yeah.
Where are you? So if let's say you're in a super flex draft in your first couple tiers here, do you feel like you're okay falling back into tier 3, or if a quarterback run happens, are you somebody that would want to trade up because your tier 2 is Murray, Prescott, Brady, Hurts, Wilson? Like, where would you have to be? What quarterbacks would you have to have in tier 2 left before you say, okay, I've got to trade up and get one now, or I'm okay falling into tier 3?
Yeah, no, I'd be okay with falling into tier 3, especially if you're looking at super flex. Ideally, I'd love to have 2 quarterbacks from those first top 3 tiers. But if I have to fall back to tier 3 and have 2 quarterbacks from that tier, I'm perfectly okay with that.
You have a Burrow in your tier 1, which I don't know if a lot of people would put him there just because of, I feel like everybody's nowadays infatuated with the rushing upside, right? Which I don't think we'll see much of Burrow. He's already suffered 2 injuries to that knee. He had the pretty bad knee injury 2 years ago and then was playing with the sprained MCL. Do you think that's just volume and then obviously just all the talent around him that's going to get him up into that tier 1?
Yeah, no, you hit the head of the nail. You look at Burrow going back to last year. I'm like, as the season went on, he improved. If you look at from, I think it was let me think for a second, like from week 6 on, like he averaged 304 passing yards and 24 fantasy points per game. Like the Bengals, this offseason, they've addressed their offensive line. They also have an offense you mentioned with those playmakers. They got Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, as his top 3 receivers. And so he should continue to hit the ground running, in 2022, pick up where he left off last year. Also like the addition of Hayden Hurst too. I think he can be, a nice playmaker for them and really have some favorable matchups. And so when you combine all those factors, I really like Burrow. We saw what he was able to do with the subpar offensive line when he was protected. Just think about what he can do and what his ceiling could be, if that protection is more consistent and he's not having to manipulate the pocket quite as much. So I'm excited to see it.
So I should have called it out earlier. Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, and Joe Burrow. That's tier 1.
Yeah.
Do you think so? Jackson had been kind of cool on the contract situation up until like yesterday maybe it was today where it was leaked out that he basically said, I'm not playing until I get a new contract. But yet he's his own agent. So like, do you foresee there being a hiccup in the negotiating process with Lamar Jackson? Or is it just I'm not going to really attend some of these meetings and these off-season program stuff kind of statement?
No, I think ultimately, it's just almost reminds me of some posturing like in the media. So ultimately, I think they'll work something out. It's just if you look at his statistical body of work, I'm like, and the success that they've had, they have no choice, not to coexist. Because I know he ended up disappointing fantasy managers last season. Had some injuries, but he's still a fantasy football dynamo. Like if you look over the last 3 seasons, he's averaged 26 fantasy points per game and his rushing ability is obviously well publicized. So I do like Jackson quite a bit this year. I think he could be a nice value, relative to his ADP, to those other upper echelon quarterbacks we're talking about. So no, they're going to figure something out.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. He hasn't put it together completely. Like he had that 36 touchdown pass season and then a 1,000-yard rushing season. I think when he kind of puts that all together, and we're right on the verge of it now that they've got Bateman and Hollywood and Andrews with Dobbins coming back. I feel like he's right on the cusp of having just a monster season.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So, and then in tier 2, you have Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott, Tom Brady, Jalen Hurts, and Russell Wilson.
Mm-hmm.
So from a dynasty perspective, do you still keep Brady in tier 2?
Yeah, if you're looking at dynasty, that's obviously going to be different because you're, despite, Tom Brady having the super soldier serum and, doing all these athletic feats, it's like, I think we're looking at like the last season for him, or two, but it's just someone in dynasty. You're going to have to drop him down, quite a bit. I'm really curious about Jalen Hurts though. And I think with this trade and the type of season that he has this year will dictate, whether he's, the future for the Eagles. So I think he's someone for where, if you're looking to make a trade with someone where they're a little bit, uneasy, about that uncertainty, then I think that's a player that I would definitely target. But with Dak Prescott and some of the other names that you mentioned, they're obviously younger, not as old as Brady. So yeah, I haven't done any dynasty tiers. That you've given me an idea that maybe something I'll put together.
I just drafted Jalen Hurts, who I'm admittedly not a huge fan of, but I drafted him as my up, based on his rushing ability. I feel like he's at 800 yards, probably 800 and 8 to 10 touchdowns rushing and 20 touchdowns passing is kind of where I feel his production is going to be. And I'm okay. It's a standard scoring league, a dinosaur league. I rank standard scoring, and I rank for standard, and it occurred to me I should probably make sure I'm playing in a standard league, and so I started one, and we'll see. I don't think I'm going to have Hurts be viable after 2023. I think he is probably going to be a backup after that.
Yeah, his situation is I think is interesting. I think a lot of people are watching it. I just view him as being like their long-term starter. I know he'll enter this season, being healthy. He's, he had ankle surgery. I think that injury, if you look back at last year, like clearly slowed him down. The Eagles, they are a run-based offense that could lower his fantasy ceiling, but they're likely to have some design runs for him.
Miles Sanders managers would beg to differ.
Yeah, no, good point. But you look at Philadelphia, like they ran the football like on 67% of their plays like last season. And I did read, I forgot where I read it, but just, like beat writer reports, that kind of thing. I know Hurts is also working on his passing this offseason, which is obviously a good thing. He's trying to continue to improve and get better. So hopefully we'll see all that stuff come to fruition in 2022. So we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you on Hurts. I feel like I'm the one on this podcast who's been kind of championing for him. I mean, he's played in 19 games, so barely a full NFL season, and he's continued to get better every single year. We've seen, I mean, not to say that Lamar's on the same level of his passing, because I do think Lamar's a little bit of a better passer, but we saw Lamar struggle that first year or so as a real passing quarterback. It took him a little bit of time to get going, and now he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league. I do think Hurts can be there. I do have a interesting question about your tiers. I think I just noticed when I was looking at him again here that your top tier 1 is all AFC quarterbacks, and tier 2 up until about a couple weeks ago when Wilson got traded to the AFC was actually all NFC quarterbacks. If there's one guy in there, maybe it's Kyler because he's right there at the top. There's one guy there in your tier 2 you think could make that jump into tier 1. Who would it be for you?
Yeah, I just love Russell Wilson because he was in that tier. And so that would be the name. When I think about Russell Wilson with kind of a situation, I know he's got Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick, KJ Hamler. He's in a really, really good position in place. And Denver has been in the what's the best way to describe it? The quarterback basement, for quite some time. Since those last couple of seasons of Peyton Manning. And let me think about this stat. It was a really good one. So Denver's finished like 21st or worse in the league, like in passing touchdowns in each of the past 6 seasons. I think that'll obviously change, like with Russell Wilson. He's still in his physical prime, lead arm strength, accuracy, high football IQ. And I just think the Broncos are going to lean like heavily on that. So I think he's someone that can ultimately make that leap into that top tier. And I would go as far as to say like Wilson has the potential to finish as like I would say the top 5 at the position.
Okay. I like
So
it.
are you Team Sutton or Team Judy?
I'm Team Judy.
Oh, man.
I'm Team Judy. Roll Tide, baby. Roll Tide.
Yeah, I think we're all on Sutton over here. We think he's going to be the guy that they use more like DK in this offense. But I'm with you. I mean, it's definitely going to be. And then you got Albert O as well at tight end, who they've been talking up. Hackett is seemed to almost always have a pass heavy offense. So I'm with you. He's a guy who could be really, really fun to watch this year, especially if they just let him cook. I mean, we've talked recently, whatever it was a couple years ago when Pete Carroll and that offense actually let him pass the ball that first half of the season. I think he was like a
glorious.
top 3 quarterback. Yeah, he was top 3. And so if he gets into the AFC, and he's going to have to against the Chargers and the Chiefs, so it should be a lot of fun to watch.
Agreed.
So as we head into tier 3, it starts to show its age a little bit more. We got Matthew Stafford, Derek Carr, Trey Lance, Aaron Rodgers, Desean Watson, Kirk Cousins, Justin Fields, and Tua Tagovailoa. So was Tua in tier 3 before the Tyreek Hill trade, or did that bump him up?
I'm trying to remember. I'm just not as like I'm optimistic about Tua. We'll touch on Tua, and I like Derek Carr quite a bit. I know I've been vocal about that, so we can kind of touch on him and some of those other names. I would say with Tua, so I think he could be still viewed as like a high-end QB2. He's got upside for more. It's clear that the Dolphins want to build around him, which is good. Young quarterback. Hey, we're adding these other playmakers. I just think the preseason will be vital for Tua, especially when you got Teddy Bridgewater there in Miami as well. I think from a fantasy lens, as Sun Tzu mentioned, in the midst of chaos, there's also opportunity. And I think a lot of people may be a little uneasy about Tua, saying, okay, is Teddy Bridgewater going to make starts? Is he really going to make the leap? And I think he's really going to end up being like a nice value. So I think managers should take advantage of that ADP discount. And I really like Tua, especially in Superflex leagues, landing him as like your QB2. That's a great example of someone that you draft as your QB2, but he has upside for so much more.
Is Desean Watson in tier 3 for you because of us not really knowing what is going to happen with his future, even though he got traded to Cleveland? Or is it just because he hasn't been on the football field for over a year now?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. And he's someone for where I could easily see bumping up into that next tier. I think if they add on like another, like playmaker, whether it's like Will Fuller or, if Odell Beckham, signs there, or if they end up, drafting someone. So, but he's someone I think that can easily exceed expectations. As far as like the layoff, I know a lot of people were. I had some conversations on Twitter where people were just like, okay, well, he missed out on the 2021 season. I just think we're going to get the same quarterback, that we saw from 2018 to 2020, where you average 25 fantasy points a game. Even if you just isolate his 2020 season, I'm like, he led the league in passing yards, finished 5th in fantasy points among quarterbacks. He's going to return to the field as a QB1, in my opinion, in Cleveland. He does have numerous playmakers right now. He's got Amari Cooper, Donovan Peoples-Jones, who's a breakout candidate. He's going to be a popular sleeper this summer. And of course, he's got Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. I'm just curious to see what other playmakers they build like around him. I think he's someone before the dust settles that he'll end up being in that second tier.
What do you think of him being paired up with David Njoku?
I do like that. I do like that quite a bit. And so you look at Njoku, who could be popular streamer, once we're in the season, or just a late round tight end. But I just think with his athleticism, and you look at Watson's, playmaking ability and accuracy, I think that's going to be a very popular connection in 2022. So,
yeah, it felt to me like Njoku'd been inconsistent for most of his career, and the coaching staff must have really felt that on the practice field and then in games as well, he was really putting it together from a consistency standpoint. I love Njoku. I think, just, come on, man. Go ahead.
You mentioned being high on Derek Carr. I mean, he's been a consistent QB2 for the most part in his fantasy career. Adding a guy like Devontae Adams does not hurt that at all. So what are your realistic opinions on his upside here now with adding a Devontae Adams and Josh McDaniels, who we know at times has been known to run a very offense and very fantasy friendly offense?
Yeah, no, exactly. You kind of touched on some of those things. So, I'll be transparent. Carr has always been, I would say, underrated, like in fantasy. If you look at Carr's body of work, I'm like, he's averaged, 19 fantasy points per game over the last 2 seasons. And Carr's finishes a QB2 or better in 82% of his games. I would say one statistical area that has ultimately lowered his fantasy ceiling is really in the area of passing touchdowns. But if you look over the last 2 seasons, he's only averaged 1.5 passing touchdowns per game. You mentioned Josh McDaniels, offensive-minded head coach. That's obviously going to help. You also have the addition of Devontae Adams, too, which he's a monster in the red zone. And so I think to truly understand the leap that Carr can make, I think it helps to really dive a little bit deeper into Devontae Adams, some of his stats, because he's going to be his number one guy. So you look over the last 4 seasons, Adams has led the NFL with 432 receptions, 5,310 receiving yards, 47 receiving touchdowns. Adams has also averaged 22 fantasy points per game in 57 active games over that time frame. And we talk about rapport. Everyone's like, well, he had rapport with Aaron Rodgers. Well, he's got rapport with Derek Carr, too. You look at this duo. I'm like, they played together at Fresno State, 2012 to 2013. Between them, they scored 39 touchdowns and racked up 3,037 yards. I think that was the most touchdowns of any FBS combo in those 2 seasons. To bring all that together, the last time a Raiders receiver had scored more than 269.4 fantasy points was way back in the year 2000. That's obviously going to change in 2022 with Devontae Adams. And again, I think Derek Carr is one of those quarterbacks that people will draft as like a QB2, but it wouldn't surprise me if he provides you with many QB1 weeks. And I think it's a good chance too that he could finish as like a low-end QB1 for the season. So I think it's possible.
So the rumors of Devontae Adams' fantasy death have been widely overrated, is what you're saying as well, because a lot of people have kind of left him for dead in going over to the Raiders.
Yeah, and so I think he's still an elite wide receiver 1. Obviously, Cooper Kupp, that's going to be, your wide receiver 1 top guy. But I just think of it this way. If I'm sitting there in a 12-team draft and I'm at the back end of the first round of a draft, going into the top of the second, I'm like, I'm going to take Devontae Adams in the late first or top of the second all day. I'm like, he's going to be such a nice value this year relative to his ADP because it's cost a lot more to get him in the past.
Oh, yeah. I was about to say, I was just in a couple startup drafts here in the past couple weeks. He's gone in the late third in both. So Devontae Adams has. So, like, if you can get him in the third, I'm with you. There was a big discussion on Twitter today about that, if he's worth the take in there, because he's just said he's being discounted. I think a lot of that is like what you just mentioned is the way we perceive Derek Carr is not really what the stats actually tell you on how good he has been. There's another. I gotta ask this. Dennis mentioned at the beginning of the show here that we are both Ohio State fans, and I noticed that you have Justin Fields in tier 2, but the god Trevor Lawrence in tier 3. What is it about Justin Fields that has him above Trevor Lawrence? Because not many people feel that way, even based on the seasons they had last year. They still believe Trevor Lawrence coming out of college was the highest, one of the highest rated quarterbacks ever by most recruiting services, had a really great career at Clemson, was able to beat Justin Fields once, lost to him another time. Like most people view Trevor Lawrence as a better prospect than Justin Fields. So what gives him the slight edge for you to put him in tier 2 over Trevor Lawrence?
Yeah, I like Fields quite a bit, and I think a lot of people are going to be, down on him, just given the season, that he had. So he was banged up a little bit, kind of dysfunctional, coaching staff, the whole 9. You can say the same thing for Trevor Lawrence too with the Urban Meyer debacle, but that's a story for another day, right? What I like with Fields is that he's going to give you that rushing ability, and I think he's more willing to rush or to generate rushing yards and attempts, than Trevor Lawrence, but also just the playmakers that Fields has around him. I know everyone's like, well, he doesn't have anybody, but he's got Darnell Mooney, he's got Cole Kmet, and he's got a great running back, at least in my opinion, with David Montgomery. So he's been solid. He's not like the greatest physical specimen known to man, but he does enough to get the job done, and they're giving him a ton of opportunities. And so I still don't think that the Bears are done, obviously adding offensive playmakers. And so when you combine all those factors, I just like Fields. I loved his game in college, and I think this will be a really, really nice year for him. I think he'll surprise a lot of people. So, and again, it's all about trying to find those guys that are undervalued that could exceed expectations. I think Fields is one of them.
I mean, I hope so. I've got my Fields shirt on. I've been a massive fan. He was my highest rated quarterback last year. I don't want to put all of the blame on a coach, because I don't think it's mitigating factors for everybody, right? There's not one thing that causes a player to have a down season based on what we expected. But I'm right there with you. I really think he can have a bounce back year this year, and I hope so. So, because I've got a lot of shares of Justin Fields, and it would make me very, very happy if he bounces back.
So what I heard was that Derek Carr is the Kirk Cousins of the AFC.
Could be a guy that no one really appreciates, but hey, he still delivers.
Or that let's see, David Montgomery is the Kirk Cousins of running backs.
I don't know if he's the Kirk Cousins of running backs. I just kind of view Montgomery as he's like the RB2 that no one wants to draft, but he delivers. I'll put it to you like this: it's kind of easy for everyone to get like kind of intoxicated by, players like, upside and their ceiling and all that stuff. And that's fine. But if you're building your roster for where you kind of have one of those guys, like as your RB1, and you're trying to look for an RB2 that's just going to give you solid production, I'm like, David Montgomery's that guy. And he's still going to get a ton of opportunities, whether it's rushing attempts or targets. And so he's just someone I think that's just undervalued. I know I tweeted about him a couple of days ago as well.
Yeah, I like Montgomery. He was my RB1 that year coming out for Dynasty. I liked him over Jacobs. I think he's a guy that just gets it done, but he doesn't. He can do a little bit after contact, just enough to continue to be effective. But he's not going to break off a 90-yard run.
Yeah, well, he's not that guy, and he needs a mediocre to
not a lot of
average offensive line, to make it work. But yeah, I'm like, he's still a solid back.
So I see in tier 3 you have Trey Lance. Is he a guy that right now, I think at least the fantasy community, we kind of expect him to get the start because we don't think that Jimmy G is going to be the guy, but it looks like they're not going to move on from Jimmy G. If Lance does get the start, and let's say that he does play well, is he a guy you expect to rise out of that tier 3?
Ooh, that's a great question. I would say yes. I'm a big Trey Lance guy. I do think he'll end up starting. I just think it really comes down to the 49ers finding a trade partner for Jimmy Garoppolo. I just believe that'll happen leading up to or even during, the NFL draft. But I think Trey Lance brings a lot to the table. But when you factor in like his intangibles, whether as a rusher or, as a passer, and then with the offensive playmakers that they have surrounding him, it's really difficult to kind of fail in that type of environment. And I know Jimmy G had some moments, with that supporting cast. Just think about what Lance can do, if given opportunity.
By the way, Eric, this is the other Matt. Eric was just singing praises about Russell Wilson and everything. Matt is a big
I know,
Broncos
I was
fan,
listening.
So.
Well, I was apparently stuck behind a tractor on the freeway.
All right, I've got to ask you about my guy really quick, Dennis, and I'll get out of your way. Baker Mayfield. I love him. I hate that what has gone down with him in Cleveland. Where do you think he possibly goes, and is there a place that you'd like to see him go to maybe return any sort of fantasy value moving forward?
Yeah, this is kind of unorthodox. So a lot of people are like, well, he should go to Seattle. They've got Drew Lock that's there. Yay. Okay, that's for fantasy, hey, that could be an interesting scenario. But then I feel like those two guys are going to end up like cannibalizing each other's fantasy value because you're gonna wonder like who's going to start week to week unless someone really runs away with the job. But I just don't see that happening. Here's what I would like to see him do. I like to see him kind of sit on the sidelines for a season and learn. And I think like the Buccaneers would be a great spot for him to do that. Get really used to that culture and sit behind Brady. And then going into the next year, why don't we have a competition between him and Kyle Trask to see who's going to be the starter? I just think that's a better position or situation where he's better positioned for success, with the players that they have. And that's really what Baker needs to do to succeed. Despite, all the swagger and all that stuff that the guy has, it's just he needs a above average supporting cast to be successful. He's not talented enough to, we'll say, elevate everyone around him. But if he's in the right situation, I think he can still be really successful. I'm just curious to see if we'll have a chance to see Baker do that.
So would you say the Birmingham Stallions?
Which one? The Birmingham what?
The Birmingham Stallions?
The Birmingham. Did you say Birmingham Stallions?
I did.
Yeah. You broke up there a little bit, Dennis.
That's okay. It was a terrible USFL joke. So
that's what I was about to say. It sounds like USFL team.
So looking at Tier 5, I really like that Winston's getting another shot, and I really felt like Marcus Mariota was a guy who deserved another shot. Things didn't finish as well in Tennessee. He got injured. He went into Oakland, Las Vegas, was a good soldier and produced when they put him on the field.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like he can be successful, but he's just set up to fail in Atlanta. Like he's going to be running for his life. He's not going to have a ton of weapons besides Kyle Pitts. And am I inaccurate there? I wanted him to be. I feel like he's got the mobility and the ability to run that teams look for nowadays.
Yeah, no, I don't think that you're inaccurate there. It's just you don't have Calvin Ridley. You don't have Julio Jones anymore. You got Kyle Pitts, like you got Cordero Patterson, but can he do everything? I think not. So it's not really the best situation. I think the only way it would really be salvageable is if there's any other free agents that are out there that they pick up. If they make some draft some players that can really help that team now. But it's really like a situation I would avoid. I don't even think that Mariota is going to be a viable streamer, even if he has a favorable matchup. It's just going to be very difficult for him to exceed expectations, in my opinion.
Well, then I'm glad I got sniped in my startup.
Or Frank Darby's a lot better than we all thought.
That could happen.
One could hope. Do you expect Atlanta to go quarterback in the draft this year?
Ooh, that's a good one. God, they just need help in so many other positions. My gut's saying no, and just to go with Mariota, is like a stopgap. Like maybe two. I doubt it'll last like 3 seasons, but I'd just be really surprised. They just have so many other areas where they need some help.
Do you think they should go quarterback?
I don't know. My gut and instincts are saying no. I don't think that they should.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think they should. I'm a firm believer you build the team from the inside out. Offensive line, defensive line, bring in because the quarterback's going to make so much money. You don't want him sitting there playing on a bad team. Get a good team, then add a good.
Yeah. Got to have that supporting cast.
Good quarterback. 2 cents. So moving away from quarterbacks, how do you feel about Christian McCaffrey? Like, where do you have him? Are you ready to say too much injury risk for me? No, he's still top 1, 2, 3. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, this may be. I wouldn't say it's controversial, but I'm just not buying it. And I'm like, I kind of view him as I would say my RB6. I can think of 5 guys off the top of my head I'd rather have than Christian McCaffrey right now. Jonathan Taylor, Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook, Austin Eckler, Najee Harris. I just think that a lot of people are assuming that McCaffrey, he's obviously going to return healthy at the beginning of the season, training camp, etc. I just think that a lot of people are assuming that he's going to return to the previous workload that he had. And I get it. Again, it's intoxicating because the guy had, I think, averaged 25 opportunities per game, I believe, over the last 3 seasons. And so I think if the Panthers really want McCaffrey to last the entire season, I think it'll be wise to diversify his opportunity share, to get someone else involved. And that may not be what fantasy managers want to hear, especially considering the draft capital you're going to have to use to land McCaffrey. But I just believe that's the scenario that we're going to see.
So the NFL draft is coming up, and we entered this offseason with a lot of teams having more questions than answers at quarterback. It's been a wild couple of weeks, and we've really seen the landscape shake up. As we head into this draft, how many of these rookie quarterbacks do you think will go in the first round? And do you like any of them with the potential to end up maybe in a tier 1 for you down the road?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Think about that for a moment. No, my instincts are saying that, gosh, it's such an interesting class. I'm thinking of guys like with, Kenny Pickett, if he would play, Malik Willis, all these guys. I don't. My instinct is saying like no. It would just have to be a scenario where someone gets injured or hurt, where they're forced to play. But I think it's one of these situations where they have these guys kind of sit and learn and develop like that way, because it's just a lot of risk with rushing a young player out there, especially where they don't have the support like around them. But I don't know. What do you guys think? That's a really good question, by the way.
Yeah, I think Matt and we've been doing mock NFL drafts, and I think when we were first doing it, we took a lot of quarterbacks in the first round, but you've seen a lot of these teams close that up.
Yeah, I honestly think that's what worries me a little bit about this quarterback class is you see all these teams making these moves to get veterans. I think tells us maybe they're not as high on the quarterback class as some of us are in the fantasy community. And so I'd be curious. Like, I know everybody says Malik Willis, but like Eric, you just said, I agree. Like, he's one of those guys who I agree. He's going to have to sit for a couple of years. He's not Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence, Zach, any of those guys that came out last year. So I don't know that any of them would. I think for me, the closest is Matt Corral. He's the guy that I think I have as my highest rated quarterback just because of what I think he can do altogether. But even then, I think you're still having to unseat, guys like, Eric, you mentioned in your tier 2, you've got Russell Wilson, Justin Fields could jump up there. Trey Lance is like, there's so many quarterbacks that I think are still kind of young enough in their careers that could be high end tier 1 or high end tier 2 guys. And it's going to be hard for some of those guys to jump up there.
Yeah. I'm like, you brought up some really good points. It's like I would say the only one, like, I would say that could start in year 1 would be like Malik Willis. And it's mainly, I'm just thinking because of the rushing ability. To be able to kind of create additional time in the pocket or generate yards on the ground to help fantasy managers. But yeah, I just think these other players and quarterbacks should just sit. It's just going to take more time.
Do you think that this class, being like it is going to maybe push some teams to go back to the development like they used to, where they would bring a quarterback in and let them sit? I know they can't lock them up for as many years contractually as they could in the 70s. But it seems to me that this class has some talent. And like you said, it needs to sit a little bit. Will teams start to take a more cautious approach if some of the guys from this class are successful in 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, I believe that they should. It's just, it really comes down to the owner of the team. And it's just not all the owners are patient, and they like the meddle. We all know the owners that like to meddle, just like to constantly be in the kitchen looking over the shoulder. What's going on over here? I think we should do this or that. And so I just don't think it'll end up happening. But I think if you have like a realistic window saying maybe year 2, year 3, and build a solid team or support system around that quarterback, I think it could work. I'd like to see more of it, but just deep down inside, I'm like, you're always going to have the team that's drafting a quarterback really high that's kind of looking to make money, be more profitable, because it is a business. It's just some go about it a little bit better than others, we'll say. So yeah, I think it should happen, but I just don't think it will.
And
that's what I'm trying to say.
That was one of Matt's arguments for why we might see a few more guys go in the first round than we were expecting, because you get that 5th year option, so you can afford to have them sit a couple more years.
Yeah. I'd like to see it. I'd really like to see it. So that'll be interesting. We should have this conversation again like a year or 2 from now and just see how did it pan out. But yeah, go ahead.
So last 3, because we've kept you here for almost an hour, and we appreciate your time. Who is your wide receiver 1? We talked a little bit about Adams, and I know you mentioned Kupp. So just want to see, is he for sure your wide receiver 1 right now?
Yeah, it for me it is Cooper Cup. It's just hard to kind of fade a guy like that, who led the league, last year with the 145 receptions, 1,947 receiving yards, 16 touchdowns. If you look at history, like the only other players to accomplish that statistical feat were Steve Smith, Jerry Rice, and Sterling Sharp. So it is hard for me to remove Cup, from wide receiver one.
Well, let me introduce you to statistical regression. I'm just kidding. No,
It'll
I
be
like
interesting
Cooper.
to see if he does like replicate those numbers. But even if he comes close to it, he's still going to be a nice value. But
Well,
who knows? He could surprise us.
Yeah, I was listening to, I think it was John Hansen talk a couple days ago, him and Adam Kaplan maybe, or Greg Cosell, and they said they felt like Allen Robinson was going to be about an 8 target per game guy.
Mhm.
And I think that still leaves, 12, 13, 14 targets for Cooper Kupp. So he could easily continue on that torrid pace because Stafford has no issues throwing the ball 50 times a game. So if the running game isn't clicking, Stafford will chuck it.
Yeah, no, you brought up a good point. Yeah, I just kind of view it as you got Stafford for where I think he'll definitely get over like 570 pass attempts for this year. If you look at the targets, I think Cooper Kupp getting over like 150, is a lot. I think a guy like Robinson, I could see him getting around, I would say like 110 to 115. That's kind of the range where I'm looking at now. And so he can still be, productive, on that. It's still going to be the Cooper Kupp show.
Yeah, I mean, the Bengals defense knew that's who they needed to cover in the Super Bowl, and they still couldn't do it. So, I mean, I can't.
Exactly.
I'd imagine he'd absolutely ball out this year. What's one offseason move you love for fantasy?
Say one that I loved. Yeah, we kind of talked about him earlier, but I would say with Russell Wilson. Yeah, that was probably the big one for me because Denver's got they got playmakers at various positions, whether it's on offense or defense. They just needed a quarterback to kind of bring everything together. So with having Wilson there, I think helps out like a lot. That was probably my favorite move.
Was it your favorite move, Fox?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very excited about that. See him and Cortland Sutton out there.
Yeah, Eric is on the Judy train. We let him know we were all on the.
I know. I live here. I'm not familiar with a player named Judy. I don't think he plays for us.
On the opposite side of that, what is one offseason move you hate for fantasy?
Oh, I was gonna say it was like a gut punch with with J.D. McKissick returning to Washington. That was brutal because it puts a damper on what could have been a breakout season for Antonio Gibson. Just given his receiving ability, like in college, and being in a position for where he could get like a lion's share of the opportunity share would have been amazing. But unfortunately, it just wasn't meant to be because we got J.D. McKissick that's returning. So I'll say that's one that I hated.
Awesome. Well, and Dennis, Matt, you guys have anything else? Or
I just really appreciate you coming on and being able to work with us schedule wise. I look forward to reading more of your work and thank you so much.
No, you're welcome. Yeah, absolutely. Happy to come on. So.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. Let everybody know where they can find you. I don't think I gave your Twitter handle earlier, so that's poor hosting on my side here. But where can they find you on Twitter and everything you've got going on?
Yeah, and so it's you can find me, on Twitter. I encourage everyone to follow me at Eric N. Moody, and just check out all my NFL, NBA, WNBA, fantasy, and sports betting content over at ESPN. But gentlemen, hey, thanks again for the invite, and I look forward to the next time. I guess we'll see each other in the Twitter streets, as they say, right?
I think that's what they say. Yeah, I don't, but I hear that's what they say.
I have Jerry Judy as a keyword search, so I'm sure it will come up.
All right, everybody. Thank you guys so much, and we will talk to you guys again